Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second episode of N8n at Scale. Once again, I'm your host, Angel Menendez, staff developer advocate here at N8n. I'm looking forward to following up on our previous episode of N8n at Scale, Mission Control Center in Slack. Today's will be part 2, deploying Slack apps for seamless N8n integration. Let's go ahead and dive right in. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about mission control again within Slack, why Slack app integration matters. We're going to be doing an overview of the Slack app builder sections. We're going to be doing a detailed walkthrough of setting and permissions across a few different demos of different workflows that I have that demonstrate the functionality within Slack, some best practices for app deployment within N8n, and we're going to summarize at the end. So let's talk big picture. What are Slack apps? Slack requires you to deploy an app in order for you to connect it to N8n. So think of the Slack app as the intermediary that does the connection between N8n and the Slack interface. Slack apps can be installed in workspaces, so this allows you to deploy it within your organization, and Slack apps can be then added to channels individually. This allows for you to have more granular controls of your Slack app deployments. Now, when I'm talking about the Slack app, I'm talking about this user interface that we're looking at here on the right-hand side. So you can think of this as a home for all of your scopes and your permissions, and it has different functionalities that you can turn on and off. Some of these functionalities you may need, some of them you may not. So we're going to be talking about some of the most common functionalities within these Slack apps that you need to utilize, and it's good for you to understand in order for you to utilize N8n to your benefit. Now, right off the bat, I know it can be a little bit confusing, and Slack doesn't make it easy on us. One of the things that I'd like to point out is the URL, api.slack.com/apps. This is where you're going to want to go to essentially create your own Slack app. Before we dive into it, we're going to actually go through the process of creating a Slack app and essentially installing it into our workspace. But before we do, let's take a quick look at the authentication flow of creating a Slack app. So within Slack, you can essentially see here that it's not as simple as just getting an API key and being set. It's a little bit more complex than that. So the first step we're going to do today is we're going to be creating a Slack app. And again, that can be found at api.slack.com/apps. Next, we're going to grant it permissions and scopes. So in order to utilize the Slack app, we do need to turn on certain permissions. And we're going to be taking a deeper dive into this. Once we've given the Slack app the permissions we need, we're going to go ahead and install it to our workspace. This isn't too difficult to do. And typically it pops up automatically as permissions and scopes changes. Once it's installed, we're able, if needed, to install it to different Slack channels. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. Now, this is optional. If you're using something like the Interactivity and Shortcuts and you don't need to post into any specific channel, this is not needed. We can skip this. But we will be going through it today just to show how simple it is. Then we need to decide on whether we want to use an OAuth credential or a bot token. Now, these do have different functionalities. So if you utilize OAuth, whenever you post in a Slack channel, it will display as your username and avatar. It will not show up as the Slack app. However, if you use the bot token, that will show up as the Slack app's name. So I tend to use the bot token more, depending on the need. Lastly, we'll go ahead and create our N8n credential, and then we'll test our functionality in N8n. Let's take a look. Now, before we dive into these demos, let's take a quick look at what features are available and what we'll be covering today. So there are some functionality that we will not be covering in today's video, mostly because I haven't built a lot of content with these features, but they still exist and they are still very powerful, and they should work just fine with N8n because most of these features utilize block kit, which we covered in our previous video. Let's take a quick look at what functionality is available. So Slack allows us to do something called an app home. An app home is like a dashboard that displays dynamic content within an app. This allows you to do things like display calendars or different UI elements using block kit directly within a centralized location. Next up, we have agents and assistants. So this allows you to deploy AI assistants or other chat-based tools. This is a fairly new functionality that's been added recently, so we won't be covering this either. Additionally, workflow steps. Slack has its own built-in automation tool called workflows. Now, you can actually build modular automations within workflow to deploy essentially like n8n nodes or blocks. Again, this is a fairly new functionality, so we won't be covering it in today's video. Now, what we will be covering today is these 4 functionalities. So incoming webhooks, which is a fairly simple functionality within Slack. Interactivity and shortcuts. This is probably one of my favorites. You can do so much with interactivity and shortcuts, essentially building your own UI on top of Slack's interface. Next up, we're going to be covering slash commands. Slash commands are a simple way of getting inputs into your app. They essentially take in a single string input, which essentially makes things fairly simple as far as what you can do. There's really not a lot of input validation that we can do other than saying, hey, we weren't able to get something. But it is something we will cover because sometimes that's all you need is a single string input. And last but not least, we're going to touch on event subscriptions. Now, you can think of event subscriptions as essentially your Slack app listening to a Slack channel. And as messages are posted, it receives every single one of those, and it can be set to process that data in whatever way you choose. So again, very powerful, although you need to think through what you want it to do. So let's dive in. So let's start with an incoming webhook. Again, great for simple non-authenticated Slack connections where simple messages need to be sent to a specific channel via webhook. Let's take a quick look at the functionality here. And before we do that, let's actually visit the Slack apps. All right, so this is where we want to be. So the api.slack.com/app. So from here, you can create your own Slack apps. For the sake of today's video, and because there's so much authentication keys that are going to be shown, at the end of this video, I'm going to be deleting this app that we're going to be creating today. But let's go ahead and go through the process. As you can see, I've already got quite a few Slack apps here deployed, and we're going to be deploying this in n8n labs. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is you can actually back up your Slack apps and deploy them as a JSON file, which makes sending them or essentially deploying them very simple and easy. Or we can start from scratch, which is what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to go ahead and give it a name. So we're going to call this sample Slack app. And our workspace, we're going to be deploying this in n8n labs. So we're going to go ahead and create our app. Pretty straightforward. And here we go. All right, so now we've got our basic information. So this here on the left are our tabs, and here on the middle we have the functionality that we want to focus on. For the sake of what we're doing today, we don't need to worry too much about this functionality. These, again, we've got our app level tokens, display information. For now, the only thing I'm going to focus on under the basic information is the display info. One of the things I do like to do is give my app a cool code name. I find that if we utilize a code name, our teams are more likely to remember it. And if it's something fun or exciting, then we typically are able to essentially get more employee buy-in. And in enterprise level organizations, sometimes this is the most fun we can have. So it's good to come up with fun, exciting names. And I even like to give my apps fun icons. I find that ChatGPT is great for this, both for generating lists of app names, descriptions, and even generating a Slack avatars. And then we essentially can give it a long description just so that the team knows what it's for. And last but not least, if it's something, if we want to go ahead and delete it, this is what I'll be doing at the end of the video today. We'll just delete the app. Let's dive into it. So here under collaborators, essentially you can invite other Slack users to manage your app. This gives you the ability to grant additional functionality, make the tool work a little bit more collaboratively. And that way you don't have a single point of failure. So always a good idea to work with a team whenever you're deploying these Slack apps so that you have multiple eyes on what you're deploying. Now we're going to go ahead and skip socket mode. In theory, I believe socket mode is supported in n8n, but it is not very simple to deploy, and I have very little experience with it. So we're going to go ahead and skip this. Let's go ahead and go into install app. So before we can get into this, we do need to give it some kind of permission or scope. So we're going to be diving into this here in just a moment. And manage distribution. If you build a super app that you feel needs to be exposed to the world, under manage distribution, we can essentially deploy it out to the world. So something to keep in mind. Here's the functionality we were looking at. For now, I'm going to be focusing on OAuth and permissions. So let's go ahead and scroll down. For the OAuth authentication, we will need to add our instance redirect URL. This is available within the n8n credential, so we'll take a look at that in a moment. And here is what we're looking for. So scopes are essentially the permissions for your apps to do things within Slack itself. By default, these apps do not have any permissions to do anything. In this case, it's not even deployed to our n8n workspace. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the permission scopes that we have. Now, Slack being a messaging channel or a messaging chat platform, one of the main things we're going to be doing is sending messages in channels. So I like to do a search for channels. And as you can see here, they're pretty straightforward and well described. So you can understand essentially what you're doing. So for example, view messages and other content in public channels that the Slack app has been added to. That's pretty important if I want to do a search within a specific channel, sometimes to see if content has already been posted. This is almost a requirement. So additionally, let's go ahead and we want to be able to join public channels. We want to read about public channels that exist. So this allows the n8n node to be able to give a list of the different channels within the workspace. So this gives the Slack app the power to create new channels or even manage them. So let's take a look. Let's see here, we can write invites. That's if we want to invite new members. So if we wanted to create a bot that onboarded new members to specific, for example, onboarding channels, we could do that. Create a topic for the channels. And here we go, chat write public. So send messages to channels. Oh, that sample Slack app isn't a member of. So this is still not even what I'm looking for. Let's take a look. And actually what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and search for, so chat write, send. So this is one of the main ones. So send messages to the sample Slack app channel. Very important. This allows us to just post in different channels that we're in. And then chat write public. So for public Slack channels that this app isn't a part of, this will grant it that permission. So for now, again, there's a lot of different permissions here. Another one that's important is start direct messages with individuals. I'm going to go ahead and give it that. And just to go through here, we'll do a few more. Oh, add shortcuts in our slash commands. We're going to need that. And let's do IM here. So I'm going to do IM, most of the IM. Read. And the Slack app n8n documentation does a great job of kind of going through which ones are best to utilize. Ooh, files read and write. This is good for uploading files if you utilize that functionality. But for now, we're going to do incoming webhook. And I think events. Nope, that one we're good. And I recommend essentially go through this, figure out which ones you need. But for now, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next function. I'm just going to make sure that there's nothing I'm missing here. One of the more useful permissions is this chat right customize. This allows you to customize essentially who your Slack app posts as. So you could actually change your profile image and your avatar and your username to something else. So if you have different app names or different functionalities you want to deploy within one Slack app, you can do that using this. We'll look at this in just a moment. Now, these are the bot token scopes. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the difference between these two. But here we have OAuth scopes, very similar. So if I do right, you'll see that there's slightly different permissions here available. So here we go. This allows us to send, if we were to utilize the OAuth, we would be able to send a message on behalf of, for example, my user account instead of the bot account. So we'll go ahead and for now, just give it that. And we'll also give it, I am right. All right, perfect. So that's essentially it. So now we could also further protect our instance by restricting API token usage to specific IP addresses. So essentially what we can do is if we know our n8n instances IPs, we can set them here, and that will further protect even if one of these API keys is exposed. It's not a problem. As long as the calls are being made from this IP address or this range, we'll be all right. So something to keep in mind. And lastly, if we need to revoke all OAuth tokens. Now that we've gone ahead and given it more permissions, what we can do is we can install this app to our workspace. So let's go ahead and do that now. As you can see, it's asking us for permission, and it wants to know where it can post as in case, essentially, I believe this is for the incoming webhook. So I'm just going to go ahead and put, let's do the ideas channel for now. We'll give it just a moment, and there we go. So now here we have our OAuth tokens, and we have our bot user token. So this is what I'm going to utilize in my Slack app, or I'm sorry, my Slack n8n node for essentially posting our messages. So we'll take a look at that here in just a moment. Now that we've gone ahead and done that, let's take a look at our UI. So here we are in our n8n labs. And if we scroll down to the bottom, we can go ahead and add apps. And there it is. As you can see, it's already been installed to our instance, so our sample Slack app. Now what we can do is we can go ahead and install this to different channels. So essentially, let's go ahead and click on n8n errors. We'll go ahead and go to integrations. And as you can see, we have our Knowledge Ninja. So it's another Slack app that I've deployed internally. So I'm going to go ahead and add. Oh, we've reached our limit here, so that's fine, because all we're going to do is do our sample Slack app. So there we go. We've added our sample Slack app here. And now essentially we can post here to n8n errors. So we're going to go ahead and test that here in a moment. And that's essentially it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy my bot user token. And let's go ahead and go into our Slack, one of our Slack apps here. And let's go ahead and create a new credential. And we're going to use our access token and paste. And we'll call this sample Slack app bot token. And we'll go ahead and hit save. There we go. And as you can see, it was tested successfully. Great. It's exactly what we want. And it is now working. Now, let's go ahead and test this. So if we go ahead and pull up a new Slack app, we'll just go ahead and do send a message. We'll go ahead and choose our sample. There it is, sample Slack app. Send a message. We'll do channel. Oh, we didn't give it the right permission. That's why we can't see it, but that's okay. I know that we've added that app to n8n errors. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the channel ID down here. And I'm just going to go ahead and by ID, paste that here. So now let's go ahead and do a hello world test. There we go. Let's see if we got it. There it is. Hello world. Excellent. That's exactly what we're looking for. Now, if we were to use the user token, let's see what that would look like. So let's go ahead and paste that. We'll do sample Slack app user token. All right, let's go ahead and retest this. And there it is. It's as if I posted it. So as you can see the difference here, it is very important which of these two credential types you utilize. Otherwise, it's going to determine who you post as. So like, for example, here, what we could do is change the profile photo and send as user because we gave it that permission. So if we give it a different image, we can display a different image. And if we send as a user, test app. Or actually, let's do something a little funner here. So Jedi bot. We'll go ahead and test the message. And as you can see, it's still sending it under our user. Now, if we change this to the bot token and try again, there's our Jedi bot. So again, if you use the user, it's not going to allow you to change who you're posting as. You do need to use the bot token in order to do that. Now that we've gone ahead and created this, let's go ahead and understand some more of the different functionalities. So let's start with our incoming webhook. That was the first one that we were looking at. So to deploy this, let's take a look here at incoming webhooks. Now, incoming webhooks are essentially a little bit simpler. They don't even require really authentication unless you have some kind of IP-based restrictions, but essentially it allows any app that uses webhooks to send a message into Slack. And from there, it'll post a simple message. Now, one of the things I really appreciate is that they give you this curl example here, which we can utilize. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And here is our HTTP request node. Now, I've already filled this out, but I'm going to go ahead and, for the sake of simplicity, show how simple it is to deploy this. So I'm going to go ahead and use the HTTP request. And I'm just going to import curl. And there we go. We're ready to go. So this is going to post to the ideas channel instead. And I'm going to go ahead and test. And there we go. Hello world. So very simple. Doesn't even require any authentication. And here we can type in whatever we want, and it'll essentially post it to one specific channel. So here, if we go back, we can create a new one. So add a new webhook. So let's do errors, n8n errors, and we'll go ahead and allow. There we go. So n8n errors, we'll go ahead and copy that URL. Let's go ahead and switch to the other channel. And all we have to do here is change the URL. We'll go ahead and test. And there it is again, hello world. So as you can see, functionality is very limited here, but it is very simple to get up and running, very easy to deploy, and anyone with that URL can post directly to the channel in question. Now, the likelihood of information being stolen is low because you're only sending data in, you can't receive data out. So that covers essentially our incoming webhook. Next up, let's take a look at our slash commands. So this is great for simple apps that require a single string input. Our demo today takes in a ServiceNow ticket. So let's take a look at that. So here we go. Now you'll notice I don't have any Slack nodes here. We've only got the webhook nodes. So let's see how this works. I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL. There it is. So this is our test URL. And let's go back into the Slack app. And let's take a look at slash commands. So we're going to go ahead and create a new command. We're going to call this ServiceNow incident. And the request URL, this is the n8n webhook URL. And here we're going to do query incident ID. And then here we'll put incident ID to let the user know what string we expect. So in this case, just a single input. And this is how it's going to look. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and hit save. There we are. Excellent. And now this is ready to go. So let's go ahead and head back into our ServiceNow. There it is right here. And let's go ahead and get the actual incident ID here. I believe it's this one. It won't matter here. We're gonna get an output no matter what. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna head back into here. And what we're gonna do is hit a backslash and snow. Here it is. And now it's expecting the input. So I'll just go ahead and paste. And what we're gonna do is hit enter. Oop, we forgot to turn it on. Let's go ahead and turn on the listener. Oops. And it doesn't like that there's no credentials here, so we'll just create a simple credential here. And that's okay, it doesn't have to work. And let's try this once more. Oops, there it is. Excellent. So let's take a look at what happened here. So essentially, we were able to trigger this workflow. Now let's take a look at the execution. And let's copy this to our editor so we can see the path. Excellent. So this is what happened here. So essentially, let's go ahead and close these out. Excellent. So here, as you can see, we received that webhook call, and we included this text input. So this text input essentially passed it into here. We extracted the value that was sent into our incident search. So here is our ServiceNow incident search. And then here we see if we got a response or not. So either we get an error, which we will notify that, hey, this isn't working, something's broken, or incident not found, also a possibility. Or the last one, we did find it. And as you can see here, we're using BlockKit, as we talked about from our previous webinar, to display the content in this much nicer UI. So it's broken up into these two columns, and we've got bolding in the message, just essentially a little bit nicer UI here as far as notifications. So that essentially covers our slash commands. Slash commands here essentially allow you to pass in a single string as an input into Slack and then respond accordingly. All right, now let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Our next one is our interactivity and shortcuts. So this one we demoed in our last work, but let's take a look at this once again anyway. So if I want to deploy this, what we're going to do is we're going to head into our interactivity and shortcuts here on the left, and we're going to go ahead and turn this on. Now, we will need a URL. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use an existing one, our image upload bot. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this and paste it into here. So there we go. And then we need to create a shortcut to trigger this. So let's go ahead and create a global shortcut. And we'll call this image upload test. And then we're going to create a short description, sample bot image upload. And the action ID is specific to here. So let's go ahead and see what we use for our action ID. I believe it was either idea selector. If I'm not mistaken, we'll try that. And then we'll go ahead and create. And we're going to leave the menus out of it for now. We'll cover that again in a future video, and we'll go ahead and save changes. And there we are. Now let's go ahead and try this. So I do need to hit test workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and unpin this and hit test. And then let's go to image. Oh, looks like it hasn't loaded. Now, if you do see this happen, usually it just means that the UI has not loaded the specific command. So let's take one last look through here. Let's see if we need to deploy it. Nope. All right, so usually closing out the Slack interface and then reopening it typically fixes these issues. So we'll go ahead and close it, give it a moment to load. There we go, back in n8n labs. Now if I do sample, there it is, image upload test. Excellent. So let's go ahead and select it, and there we are. So that went ahead and triggered it. So let's go ahead and see what happened. So here we go, we got it. Oh, and we did do idea selector, so we did set the correct callback ID. We responded to Slack with a success, and we displayed this pop-up UI. So again, I find that this is one of the most powerful UI, one of the most powerful of Slack's builds, because it essentially allows you to create custom UIs within the Slack interface itself. Now, I've covered this in much greater detail in my part 1 of this series, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. But if you were curious as to how this works, check out video 1 for more information. Excellent. Last but not least is our event subscriptions. So essentially this is good for listening in to different channels. So let's take a look at how to deploy this as well. So I'm going to go ahead and go into event subscriptions. And again, we're going to go ahead and turn this on. And let's go ahead and pull up our event listener here. And I've copied the URL, and we're going to go ahead and paste it. Now, we want to be careful because, as you can see, it errored out. That's because it did not respond back with a challenge. So it's actually pretty straightforward. We have our verify webhook here, and here's the challenge. We're basically sending back the information that we're receiving. Now, because this was not turned on or running, it didn't work. So I'm going to go ahead and test it. I'm going to tell it to retry. And it's now verified, good to go. Now this periodically, I believe it's every 2 hours or so, runs to test that the URL is listening. So if we go back here, you'll notice that I have a do nothing step. So this is if it's a verification check, it just does nothing. It just verifies a webhook and moves on with its life. Now, if there is a message in here, then we will go ahead and process it accordingly. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the functionality here. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and fire off a message here. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go back to our subscription. So we can subscribe to events on behalf of users or bots. So in this particular case, we're going to go ahead and add a bot user event. So different events allow you to listen to different things. So in this case, we're going to do messages. So let's find the messages section here. So here we go, message.channels. So we're going to go ahead and select that. So a message was posted to a channel. And actually, better yet, let's go ahead and let's only listen to whenever the bot is called. Let's go ahead and delete this one, and let's do @mention. And let's go ahead and hit save. Now you'll notice because of this change in scope, we do need to reinstall the app into our workspace. So essentially making sure that everything is good. So we're going to choose ideas, allow, and there we go. So now let's go ahead and head back here, and I'm just going to go ahead and mention the app. And before I do, let's go ahead and turn this on. And there it is. So it received it. It checks. It didn't pass the checks because this was built for something else. But essentially, as you can see, it's listening. Now, let's try one more. Let's go ahead and do that channel or message IM. Let's see if we can get it to trigger on a simple message. All right, there we go. So we're going to go ahead and add the permission message.channels. Let's go ahead and see if we receive that. So I'm going to come back here. We're going to go ahead and start listening. And this is a test message. Now, I don't believe that worked because it was a private channel, as seen here with the little lock. So that is different than a public channel. So let's go ahead and add another scope. There we go. Private channel, save. We do need to reinstall. We'll go ahead and do n8n errors, allow. There we go. Now let's go ahead and start listening again. And this is a test. There it is. So as you can see now, it is listening for basically any messages that come into the channel. Hello world. There we are. So essentially you can build a flow that is constantly listening to these messages that flow into these channels, whether it's a public or a private channel, as you can see here. And essentially that concludes it. So let's go ahead and do a quick summary of what we've covered today. So we've talked a little bit about the different features that are usable within Slack and how to deploy these within the Slack UI. One thing we didn't cover was how to export these permissions. So as you can imagine, building these permissions can be difficult. So if I want to deploy this in a different workspace, for example, it's very easy to export. Or for example, if you need permission from another team member to deploy your sample Slack app internally in an enterprise organization, what I've found is deploying your own Slack instance first for free is usually best, building it out, making it work, then requesting permission from the IT department, or if you are the IT ops department, awesome, you're good to go. Otherwise, they'll ask, what permissions do you need for your Slack app? That can be a very difficult question to answer. So instead, what you can do is click on app manifest here. You can copy to clipboard and say, hey, here's the app manifest. These are all the permissions, URLs, everything we need to essentially deploy this app. And you can just pass them this JSON, and it allows you to quickly redeploy this app in a live instance much faster. So again, to summarize, we've covered essentially how to deploy the Slack apps, how to use the credentials within n8n, and how to fire them off. Now I will be deleting this Slack app here, but other than that, I hope that this was an informative video, and I hope this walks you through the more difficult aspects of deploying a Slack app internally. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.